University of Louisville understands that their students come from diverse backgrounds with aspirations, drives, and needs to match. With more than 50 online programs in areas like business, education, social work, engineering, and more, UofL provides students with a multitude of career advancing options and flexible coursework. Students can complete their coursework from the comfort of their home or on the go via mobile apps. Learn more at louisville.edu/online. That's louisville.edu/online.
From the University of Central Florida's Center for Distributed Learning
and the University of Louisville's Delphi Center for Teaching and Learning.
I'm Tom Cavanaugh.
And I am Kelvin Thompson.
And you are listening to Topcast, the world-renowned teaching online podcast. I mean, I guess it's also sort of a video thing too, right?
Yeah, I mean, some people they use the podcast label for the video thing. I don't know. It confuses me.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I guess it's become sort of a catch-all category.
Yeah. I was looking at YouTube not long ago when I was logged in doing something, and I haven't really looked into it a lot, but it was like, oh, do you want to make this video, do you want to label it as a podcast? Like, do I? I don't know. What does that do for me? I don't know. So I have to look into that.
I guess we should. I mean,
yeah.
We started sans video for a long time before we went to video.
Yeah.
But you, listener or watcher, viewer, consume it however you want.
In a cup.
Yeah, in a cup, yeah. To give you options, yeah. So speaking of in a cup,
you could drink the podcast.
I saw you sipping. I am sipping as I was introing. So as we like to say here on Topcast, Kelvin, what's in the thermos?
Well, I guess as a reminder, right, we do bill this show as a collegial conversation about online blended digital teaching and learning conducted over a shared cup of coffee. The thought is you can pull up a virtual seat and a favorite beverage and think along with us about the day's topic. But, you know, seat doesn't have to stay virtual. I mean, you can send an episode to a colleague and sit down together and talk to them, but just like we're doing here. But yes, I am drinking a podcast in my cup here. I'll tell you what I'm drinking, but what are you drinking?
A non-thematic San Francisco Bay hazelnut cream. That these compostable K-cups that I have.
You're drinking compost? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they're biodegradable K-cups. They're nice. But the coffee is excellent. If you like hazelnut, it's my favorite actually that I brew very often. So that's what I got going.
Haselnuss makes me think of Nutella or Mozartkugeln, little candies in Salzburg, Österreich in Austria.
That's a Kelvin-only reference, I think.
That's right.
Not everybody's thinking of that.
I had those, and they had the hazelnut in there.
Maybe
I was like, ooh.
Toblerone, perhaps. But,
now I'm hungry.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, this is a weird beverage. So here's what I did. I went down to the local coffee shop, and I said to the barista, what would you say is the most confused choice that you offer? And he's like, what do you mean? Like, people order one thing, but they really mean another thing. And he says, I think maybe the cafe mocha with the white cafe mocha. Like, all right. Well, I'll have one of those. And so I thought, okay, I'll get the thing that's often confused with the other thing, because I thought that might fit with our conversation today.
Okay. Confused, huh?
A little bit.
Yeah. It reminds me, I'm a fan of the comedian Nate Bargatze, and he's got a bit where he talks about going into a Starbucks and ordering iced coffee with cream and the confusion that ensues. It's hilarious. But so confusion. Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about data.
Yep.
And that can be confusing, especially at scale, which is what we're going to be talking about. So I don't know, maybe that's a very, very kind of like Hail Mary attempt at making a connection.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I was thinking about the fact, we'll talk about it a little bit, and we have an interview guest today, and our guest talks about as this insight that people say this thing, but what they mean is that thing. And I thought, okay, you ordered this and you got that. Okay, I'm going to drink this.
Gotcha. Yeah. All right, I'm with you. So as you say, Kelvin, you recently interviewed our colleague and returning Topcast guest, Dr. Nicole Johnson. Mm-hmm. Dr. Johnson is Executive Director of the Canadian Digital Learning Research Association, along with being active as a digital learning researcher and speaker. Mm-hmm. She's notably the author of the chapter Online Higher Education in Canada. Mm-hmm. So we are again having international influence on Topcast. Mm-hmm. And that's from the Sage Handbook of Online Higher Education. And as you may recall, she was previously a guest on Topcast, episode number 124, Reliable Buckets Toward Modality Clarity.
I remember that.
So it was it's a return, appearance for Nicole Johnson. Anything you want to say about the conversation before we go to it?
No, Nicole's good people. It's a good conversation. We should all listen to it.
Awesome. So through the magic of podcast time travel, here's your conversation with Dr. Nicole Johnson.
Hi, Nicole. So good having you back on Topcast today.
I'm glad to be here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, always good speaking with you. And as it turns out, we had been speaking not too long ago, and you shared with me this new report that had, I think, just come out at about the time that we had spoken. It's still fairly recent, and it is the 2024 Pan-Canadian Report on Digital Learning. And I'm like, well, that's awesome. As I skimmed through it, that'd be plenty of fodder for discussion on the podcast. So do you mind starting for our listeners and just kind of framing up what is it and why is it?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my main roles is Executive Director of the Canadian Digital Learning Research Association, or CDLRA, as we like to call it for short, which I'll probably do to save time in our conversation today. And so the CDLRA, we started this work in 2017 and began conducting pan-Canadian surveys specific to digital learning and topics related to digital learning across Canada. And Canada is a unique context. It's different from the US in that we don't have a federal governing body for education. Education is provincially mandated. So tracking national level trends in things like education is a challenge. And to get an idea of how we were doing as a country in terms of digital learning adoption, online learning growth, that data really didn't exist prior to the launch of this our work and the organization in 2017. I joined the team in 2019, so I've been doing this work for over half a decade now and leading this study. So it is a longitudinal study. It's an annual study, an annual report that the CDLRA puts out every single year. It certainly has changed a lot over the past 5 years. As you can imagine, a lot has changed since COVID and the pandemic. Some of the things we asked, in 2019 just aren't applicable in this day and age. Like, do you have an online learning strategy? Most institutions do. And I should point out that Canada is a bit different from the US as well. In terms of our COVID response in post-secondary education or higher education, in that nearly all institutes across the country, colleges and universities, polytechnics, all went completely online for almost a year and a half in entirety. So it wasn't just a slow shift in March of 2020, but it was a rapid shift and a quick transition back to in-person. It was a rapid shift in 2020, a lot of professional development over that summer, and then an intentional response to be running online programs and teaching online for the 2020-2021 academic year. So it wasn't what we would call emergency remote teaching. And, I've had many conversations about that over the years. It switched from emergency remote to intentional online. So that Canadian space. Getting back to the purpose of the survey, as things have changed, AI has arisen. We take a look at all of these sort of long-standing issues, so just the general growth of online and how that's changing, and then also hot topics like AI and tracking the use of different technologies. So our survey goes out to people who work in higher ed, so that would be administrators such as senior admins and deans, directors, and so forth, to faculty, to people who are instructional designers or educational developers, librarians, and we get a sense, and we ask about a range of topics in a very relatively short survey. We keep our surveys at about 10 minutes or less. And since, I believe, 2022, we've actually broken our survey into two parts. So we run a 10-minute survey in the spring, another 10-minute survey in the fall, and the results of those come together to make our Pan-Canadian report, which is what you recently read. And you're right, we released it. It came out just beginning of 2025. So it's hot off the press and brand new. So
That's awesome. Not to steal readership from the report, which we will absolutely include in the show notes for this episode. People should go and read the report like I did. But just as a teaser, like a movie trailer, I wonder if I can ask you kind of a twinned, two sides of a coin kind of a question. What aspects of your findings in this report would you say are kind of consistent with themes seen other places in the world? And what aspects of the findings seem to you unique in some way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll start with the first, so those consistent themes. And I think these themes are not just consistent, to many parts of the world, but they're consistent over time. And there seems to be long-standing tensions there around academic integrity, around quality, around faculty fatigue and burnout, sort of the reasons, the barriers to adoption for online. Those remain consistent over time. I've said to many people over the years that I've now found when people are wanting to talk about modes of learning, the core of their conversation actually tends to be about quality and wanting to talk about quality. And the mode is sort of what sparks the conversation about quality, but that at the end of the day is their root concern. And we've seen that consistently over time. And we see that throughout quality assurance is a big, important thing. When people are talking about artificial intelligence, they tend to be wanting to talk about academic integrity. And we see that as being a very pressing concern and challenge. We don't actually see the conversations about AI being how to use it in innovative or novel ways. We see that in being used functionally, which makes a lot of sense. And I think in terms of overall technology use, what we're finding is very consistent with what I've seen, sort of across, is that technologies are being used, but they're being used in a very basic form. So, learning management systems, they may not be leveraged to their full potential, but they might be used to, house the syllabus for a messaging system with, between student to student or faculty and students. And what we're not seeing is, with the introduction of these various technologies, big radical change coming out of it. And I would say that I'm, except for the odd pocket here or there, I'm seeing that globally, that there isn't, I wouldn't say that we're at a time of massive disruption or change where everything's being turned on its head because of technology. And then the second part to the question, I believe, is, what's unique in the Canadian context?
Yeah.
I think what we see as being unique, and this isn't so much reflected in the report because some of these questions were asked before this happened, but we've had in Canada massive caps put on our international student body. And so many students would have come in the past from different countries as a pathway to immigration in Canada. And with the international student caps in place, our international student funds, in many ways, fund like domestic spots. Like they're huge for how universities are funded, and the majority. And I think this is a difference between Canada and the U.S. for sure. Is nearly all of our major institutions are publicly funded. So when people are talking about the universities that they're going to in Canada, it's nearly always a publicly funded institution. And so a lot of our major institutions and even smaller colleges and, across the board are facing huge budget cuts and deficits. And so this ties into the online bit, because one of the things as we're going into 2025, I'm starting to hear conversations about expanding online programs and expanding online offerings in order to attract more students. I think we also have a unique situation in Canada with the drivers of student needs and preferences. Most of our major metropolitan areas in Canada are facing a housing crisis where there's a shortage of affordable housing. So in many ways, that's driving students to pursue online because either the transportation to get to campus is too inconvenient or too expensive. The housing on or nearby campus is too expensive for them. And students are looking for online offerings. And of course, the consistent reason which we see globally is, managing competing priorities and wanting that flexibility in education for that. So, but I think the housing crisis, particularly in Canada, is a larger driver of the desire for more online options.
It's fascinating. Yeah, context, as I'm sure someone has said, maybe me, probably all of us, context matters. Context is important. Context drives a lot. And maybe in that sense, maybe our final little area here will be, I wonder if we can extrapolate a little bit from the 2024 report with some maybe broader processing of how sort of globally we're making sense of whatever you want to call it, online learning, digital learning, and the extent to which local context matters. So what are we seeing, maybe inspired by your report a little bit, but reaching farther, how are we making sense of things globally? And then how does local context matter around online and digital learning, do you think?
That's a really good question. I think one of the key things that I haven't mentioned yet that we've seen year after year is as a major challenge in Canadian institutions is faculty fatigue and burnout coming in. And that, it existed certainly before the pandemic, but the learning curve that was required for faculty in the Canadian context when everyone had to go online for, again, that year and a half, that took a lot out of people. And that was, people were in many ways, forced to learn a different way of teaching and learning. Now, there's a number of people who decided that actually worked well. They learned new ways of teaching and learning, but that we don't want to minimize the stress that went into that. So I think we have, in terms of those contexts, one of the things that comes up is how do we get faculty on board to teach online? I think globally there's that systemic resistance to change within higher ed. Like that's one of those ones that comes up a lot. And how do we overcome that? I think those of us who've worked in the ed tech space, obviously, we're strong advocates for this. We know the benefits that can happen. We know that quality online learning is very possible, and that we shouldn't necessarily make in-person learning the gold standard for quality at all. But I think some of those things that go broader and what we need to unpack are the systemic ways of doing things that seem to be holding us back a bit.
Yeah, I was going to joke. Let me write that down. There's resistance to change in higher ed sometimes. Write that down. That's good. Yeah, I think what you said right there at the end, like what the systemic obstacles or resistance points are, those can be particularized, right, in the local context. They're probably understandable themes that are graspable across larger contexts, but every context is a little bit different, and how that's manifested is unique. Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah, I would say too, another thing that I think is that I'm seeing more and more is that the local institution does matter, like even in an online world, even if students are wanting to do work online, there is something to be said about having that connection to a local institution and finding a career in your field, you know, that you're carrying a degree that comes from an institution that is known and trusted in your community. Even if you're learning online, being able to build those workforce connections within the community, I think those are important things too, that when we take those broader issues, we look at it locally, you know, online doesn't, just because something's online doesn't mean it can't be very locally connected.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very good point. I've certainly have seen a number of like broad student surveys in the U.S. context where, I don't know, you'll see percentages of 60+% of respondents enrolled in online programs say they live within driving distance of the campus. And then if they're asked questions like, yeah, have you ever been? No. But, you know, but I like the idea that I could, and it means something, right? This, I know where it is, and I like that it exists, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and we see in our reports too, like year after year, the biggest area of growth is even that hybrid, having that option. We see both amongst, you know, faculty, amongst students, that desire for choice is there. People don't want to be forced to go back to an entirely online option. There's some people who do want that, you know, so there's some people, the fully online is very much their first choice and preference. Yeah. But in that sort of messy middle are people who want the option to do both. And just like there's certainly a small group of people who want to do fully online, there's a small group of people who want to do fully in person. Yep. But we often, I think there's a misconception of how this messy middle is seemed to be smaller than it is. There seems to be this myth that there's more people who just want the fully in-person experience. And actually what we're seeing, at least in the Canadian data, is the greater desire is in that messy middle of people wanting to have the option to do one or the other and not being forced into either stream. It's the flexibility notion that comes up.
Yeah, we see that in this context. We saw it at my former institution. I like that. I've seen messy middle used as a label for a lot of different things in like the student success work and all, but I think it applies really well here. Here, yes, that messy middle is the largest proportion, for sure. Absolutely. That might actually be the answer to the question I'm going to ask you. So, you know, you're like time traveling maybe, but as we begin to wrap up, I was going to ask you just to kind of throw you a curveball and say, you know, with our listener audience of online faculty, instructional designers, administrative leaders, what's one practical takeaway from your work that you might leave them with? That might have been it, but if you've got another one, let's leave them with that.
Sure, I would say so. Definitely that one. Definitely apply what I just said about the messy middle. But also, I think the other takeaway is don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. You know, ask why. You know, as things are changing and shifting, and we're sort of fighting this, you know, this bias within higher ed to go with what's always been and assuming that's the best way of doing things, I would say challenge that. You know, why do we have 12-week semesters? Would it make sense to run an online course in a shorter format or a longer format? Or, you know, why must this be taught in person? In some instances, it might be very obvious why. There's a huge hands-on component. In other instances, I think you could say, well, why does it? Could it not be taught better and even in a more engaging way than in a lecture hall of hundreds of people? So challenge the status quo is what I will leave people with.
Well, that's a good one. That's a good one. I'm going to get that tattooed right on the back of my arm, probably. It was great having you back on the podcast today, Nicole, and I look forward to having you back again.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
So, Kelvin, that was your conversation with Dr. Nicole Johnson. Really interesting. I love hearing about what's going on in other countries, but also interesting the similarities also that you hear. It's not, we ain't so unique as I like to say sometimes.
Yeah, I think I've said before on here that, I had this qualitative research professor whose kind of mantra was that in qualitative research, we seek to make the familiar strange and the strange familiar. And I think about that in this, you learn about the particular from somebody else's context and vice versa. But I mean, back to the drinking the podcast, I loved Nicole's insight. I've been pondering this ever since she first said it of, people say modalities, but what they mean is quality. People say artificial intelligence, and what they mean is academic dishonesty.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not universally true, but all too often in both cases, right?
Yeah. It's like those memes you see of like male and female husband-wife communication. Like when the husband says something, it says what he really means, and it's like the exact same thing. But when the wife says something, what she really means, and it's like this long, nuanced thing. So sometimes it means what you think it means, and sometimes it means something completely different. And I think that's interesting, trying to understand, we have talked in the past early on in our podcasting career about boundary objects, where two people using the same term kind of mean something different by that term.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I was looking into boundary objects not long ago again, and it really is back to its origins in the 80s. Boundary objects are kind of like broad at their global implementation, but they get more specific at their local implementation. So I think the wording is it's plastic enough. But then it's more concrete and specific. Yeah, so I mean, interesting. Yep. And I love the muddy middle thing. I love, we've offline, you and I have talked about that a good bit.
Yeah, that is, as you pointed out, that is a term that we use a lot in the student success space. Here at UCF, we call it the murky middle. The same thing. Yep. We got to have that alliteration in there.
That's right. Yeah, all kinds of good stuff. I recommend listeners taking a look at the Pan-Canadian Digital Learning Report 2024. We'll put it in the show notes. Hey, just a plug. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to make a comment that it may be another similarity that she touched upon was this. It's something we've talked about here. The increase in hybridity across higher education in Canada, especially post-COVID. And I think that's the same thing that's happening here. And I thought that was an interesting insight that kind of towards the end of the conversation.
Yeah, again, that, she uses the term muddy middle for that. But yeah, I totally agree. And, you and I have talked about that a good bit. I think there is probably a way to use that more strategically or less strategically at institutions. You can fight against it or you can lean into it. I'm in favor of leaning into it. You recognize what students are doing and you try to make it a better, more helpful direction and not not an opposite one. I just liked that she kind of was kind of a throwaway, but she kind of gave us some tips for good survey design, right? Like completable in 10 minutes is a good standard.
I love that.
Would that all survey designers would employ this standard?
Yeah, true. Yeah. And maybe one kind of like final thing. It's interesting as, we're approaching, with a new federal administration and conversation about potentially the elimination of the Department of Education, if that happens, and obviously there'd be time that has to take an act of Congress, and we have to unwind a whole federal agency. But if it did happen, she talked about how higher education is sort of provincially controlled, and there is no centralized ministry, and that the challenges that posed in trying to gather countrywide national data on some of these online trends. How would we, it would be a good thought exercise to think about how would we do that going forward, because those data are really important. We've got things like the Chloe survey, and that maybe a group like that could pick up something. There's other professional organizations, OLC and UPSEA and WCET and EDUCAUSE, and there's bunches of them that could potentially pick that up. Sarah, but it's worth thinking about. Should that happen to the Department of Education, how would we ensure that we still have the kind of national data that we use for tracking the growth or lack thereof of online learning?
Yeah, she does talk about that in her SAGE Online Higher Education Handbook chapter. She, as I recall, spends a little bit of time on that. I don't know that she completely paints it as a desirable picture, but she kind of paints it as this is what is, and this is why we have to do the things that we have to do. And to your point, not all data are the same. And like if you're dealing with iPads or whatever that's, reported from institutions, that's one thing, versus surveying the administrators and faculty, that's another thing, right? But yeah, you'd have to do something to know how if you want to have a picture of how you're doing, you got to do something. And so it's good to know that there are some precedents and exemplars out there to help. I just want to say this too. I like the way that she ended with, don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. And I would say, listeners, if you haven't listened to our episode number 177, which was our recorded live episode, we released it at the beginning of January 2025, creating the digital learning future that our students deserve. I think we treat this topic a bit, this don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. It's worth listening.
Yep, I remember that conversation. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so thank you to Nicole for coming back and sharing, the survey and her insights with us and our audience. It is very much appreciated. As I said, always like learning what's going on outside the borders of the U.S.
Mm-hmm. So shall I try to wrap this up and land the plane?
Sounds good.
By way of wrap up, perhaps we'll say multi-institutional or even nationwide reports related to digital learning provide tremendous insight into the local work we as digital learning professionals do each day. They're grounding, and maybe even they inspire us to do associated data gathering and research in our immediate context. How's that?
Sounds exactly correct to me, Kelvin. So until next time, for Topcast, I'm Tom.
I'm Kelvin.
See ya.